I was scared. Yeah, I was scared. I had no idea what was going to happen. But in the back of my mind, I think I had a belief that it was going to work, but I didn't know. We turned the system on and sat there and waited, and pretty soon we started getting notifications. Buenos Aires, New York, Los Angeles, London.
Welcome to Agency in Motion, where we go behind the scenes of building, acquiring, and scaling modern agencies. Hosted by Tristan Pelligrino, this show is for agency founders, operators, and investors who want to grow smarter, structure better deals, and create lasting enterprise value. Let's get into it.
There was something that jumped out in your book about file names and file name structure. And it was the project I had was Michael Jackson's "This Is It" that you used quite heavily to set up your premise in the book that you had. And I was wondering just how someone that's working on such a big time project like a Michael Jackson video come out with a lesson learned about the importance of file names and how important those are.
Yeah, so that was my first real introduction into the visual effects world. I was a motion shop for many years. After Effects, Cinema 4D, all the traditional um, familiar motion workflows. And when I got into introduced to the visual effects world, it really opened my eyes to file naming, the importance of file naming, the importance of hierarchy, and so yeah, so that's when I really got introduced to the idea that every file was serialized, and you can follow a linear path from the first iteration of a job or a project all the way through down to what we call the final. And the funny thing about it is that we actually integrated the word final into our naming convention, which I know
Mm-hmm.
is kind of taboo in the creative world, but yeah, so that it was just an eye opener that how the visual effects world used a serialized file naming convention to keep track of hundreds, if not thousands, of files that are all part of one project.
Yeah, and Rob, when you're on that big of a project like a Michael Jackson video at that point in time, and even back then, there were a lot of, I would say, even more complications with how you would assemble a project like that than maybe even now. But what was the moment that said, hey, we do need to look at structure and we need to take that seriously with this type of project? Like, is there something where you lost a file or, you overwrote a previous version, or what was that thing that jumped out at you?
No, what it was this was the first time that I was dealing with that level of volume, right? In a traditional motion project, you've got 15 or 20 iterations of a asset that gets created. But when you're dealing with visual effects, you've got dozens of artists that are putting their hands on the same asset. One's doing wire removal, one is adding fire, one is doing lighting, one is doing something else. And so when you've got dozens of hands on the same set of assets, that's when it became apparent to me that, whoa, this is like a really interesting way to um, borrow from an industry like visual effects and apply it to our more traditional motion graphics world. And it worked out really well. I like to say, and I'm really proud of this, that in the 13 years since I adopted my method and stimulated works, and we've done you know uh, uh, tens of hours of programming across cruise ships and concert tours, millions of files. We've never lost a single file.
There you go. It's a true testament. Yeah, I mean, I think, I started out in video production. That was my first agency. I don't know if you had a chance to check that out, but that's what I did. I mean, we started, producing really video content for the web back then. It was even before YouTube came out. So I'm dating myself a little bit, been around for a little bit. And a lot of the videos that we had to get on the web, you had to build a whole Flash application around it just to have it play on the web. And there were so many different parts. And I mean, to your point, you had all these hands on one single file for it to actually come to life. And I saw a lot of those same things. We had a lot of growing pains where, you're recording audio on different tracks than video. They're not even merged together. You got to assemble that in post production, and without that infrastructure in place, it became very difficult to really work in post production. And that's really my next question. It's around, when did you start to think about creative projects, and maybe this isn't the right term, but being less focused or less art and more infrastructure, perhaps? Like, when did you realize that path or that difference there?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned post production because that's my background as well. I started off as a broadcast post production supervisor, and I was in that world at the very moment when we transitioned from scripted content to reality content, which was a big leap. So, um, with scripted content, we would shoot a scene, and the script supervisor would circle the takes, and we would bring that to the edit room, and the AEs would digitize the circle takes, and the editor would sit down with the director and assemble based on the circle takes, and that was all great. Then we got into reality, and reality meant going from a single camera or three cameras shooting off a script to five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 cameras being wide open the whole time for up to 10 hours a day. So what happened overnight was immediately directors and editors got into the edit room and they started pulling their hair out because the director was saying, I know that I filmed somebody saying this, and I know that I filmed that. And there was hundreds of hours of footage and they just couldn't find it. And so I'm kind of a serial problem solver. So I took a look at that problem, and I wanted to solve it quickly because, people don't get into this industry to chase down footage. They get, directors want to to direct, editors want to edit. So I came up with a system called Footage File, which serialized all of the reality footage. So what we did was we took all of at the time it was Betacam, loggers would log the scene. It was a tape number and a time code and a description of what was on camera, a description of what was said, and that went into a database. And so then that allowed the director to sit there and tell the editor, you know what? I remember somebody said, I'll give you a perfect example. There was a series called AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies. We would film the directors and all of the stars from all of the movies talking about the experience. So let's take Jaws. We filmed Roy Scheider. We filmed Steven Spielberg, all talking about the movie. So you've got all these talking heads and all hours and hours of footage of everybody talking about the movie. Plus you have the movie itself. So when the editor sits down with the director to tell the story about the scene where Roy Scheider says, we're going to need a bigger boat, in the edit room, they could go into my system, put in the word bigger boat. It would come up with a digitizing list of 20 clips, everybody who mentioned the word bigger boat, Steven Spielberg, Roy Scheider, and it would give them a videotape number, a time code for each of those scenes. That let them create a digitizing list that would go to the AEs overnight. The AEs would load all the clips. The next morning, that edit team, the editor and the director, could come in. Every single clip that they needed to tell that story was right in front of them, and they could just slice and dice and tell the story, and they were done.
Got it. And so that was like how you got a start, and you saw some of that, the importance of like serialized file names and kind of that infrastructure. And then as I was reading your book, with systems like Stimulated Works and the stimulated method that you put together, you were running, from what I understand, a creative agency in Los Angeles. You had a lot of talent that you were working with, local folks, right? A very traditional agency approach. What was that day to day like feeling? Could you describe as some of these ideas started to percolate?
It was a mix of good and bad. The good was working with all the artists, and that's the great part, and being creative together. The bad was trying to force the wrong artists onto the wrong project. When I first got started in 2005, six, and seven, it was all good because it was all new, and we learned how to move content across multiple screens, and we were using the traditional tools, After Effects, and but then when we started getting more into like the heavier, more interactive visual effects work, Michael Jackson, that talent didn't fit um, the job requirement. And so it got to a point where actually the talent in Los Angeles no longer met the needs of the requests that my clients were giving me. I was getting more, requests for more interactive, immersive work, and I was trying to push that work on local artists in Los Angeles that just didn't have the skill set to do what we needed. And so my experience became, creative director by day and human resources department by night. What I mean by that is, several artists would fail, in a given day. It was painful. That cost us time, that cost us money, that cost us energy, that cost us inertia. And so at the end of my day, 7 o'clock, when all the artists got up and went home, I had to go to work trying to replace three of them so that we could try it again the next day. And it was, and there were no guarantees even at that.
Yeah. And Rob, were you looking for different talent in LA, or what was the moment that you said, well, hey, maybe I have to look outside this, 50-mile boundary that exists traditionally?
Yeah. So what happened was, I had met a great client right after the recession. And the story is that, the recession in 2008, 9, and 10, like hit us really hard. I kept my shop open. I kept my team employed for almost a year while we had no work coming through the door. And I just told them, I said, if things don't change in 2010, I'm going to have to make a change. Nothing changed. 2010 rolled around. I told my team, I'm sorry, we're going to have to downsize. I sold the building. I offloaded a lot of equipment, and I kind of took a step back and said that, once the world gets rolling again, I'm not going to do this the same way. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I wasn't going to go big in a brick and mortar studio. I wasn't going to go big invested in workstations. I wasn't going to go big invested in employees that didn't necessarily have the ability and the agility to pivot to the evolving demands of the world. And so one day I was called to a creative meeting with a great client of ours in Miami. And I went to this creative meeting and I heard a big giant idea. And I thought the idea was amazing, and I thought the project was amazing, but I knew that the budget and the schedule were fixed. The idea was here, the budget and the schedule were here. During that meeting, I sat there with a big smile on my face and did a lot of nodding and gave my input. But in the back of my head, I was going, wow, this is like, there's no way this is going to happen. So I came back to my office in LA, and I I locked myself in my office and just kind of stared at a white wall and thought, like, what am I going to do? My choices are: do I tell this client, no, I'm sorry, we can't produce your great idea? Um, I didn't want to do that, and so I started thinking. And just to give you a little bit of idea about this project, it was like it was an immersive stage project with uh, all the elements of earth, wind, fire, air, water, all the hard stuff, right? Liquids, all the hard stuff, interactive with performance and really hard stuff. I was sharing an office with a woman named Dee Ivette, who's a web developer. I've known her for a long, long time. And I had this idea that um, there's probably a lot of great talent around the world that works for these big studios that do all these simulations, fires, liquids, smoke, but they don't work for these studios and agencies 247, 365, right? They've got time in between, and they're probably sitting at home with nothing to do in between their jobs. That was a total hypothesis. So I called Dee into my office and I said, Dee, if I could give you, and had a little software development in my past from my footage file with the reality show. I said, if I sketched out a website where we took a project, a big giant creative project, and broke it down into a bunch of parts and pieces and created those and called those for now jobs. And I onboard a bunch of global talent and gave them access to this website and let them see every detail about every job. And that includes the brief, the budget, the schedule, the assets, the references, the deliverable specs, everything about the job. No questions to answer. Could you build the site for me in about 6 weeks as a MVP, just to get out the door? He said yes. I called the client and took a giant gamble and said yes to a project that I had no idea that I was going to be able to deliver.
Yeah.
And Dee went to work building the site. Part of my team went to work recruiting the talent. And so we went out looking for the specialists. Like, hey, we're looking for somebody that knows how to do liquids. We're looking for somebody that knows how to do smoke. We're looking for somebody that knows how to do air. We onboarded the talent. Meanwhile, I went to work with another part of my team, and we took this big, giant project, 45-minute theater show, and we broke it down into, whatever the 100 elements, let's say. We called them, these are assets, okay? An explosion that goes like this, a liquid that goes like this when the dancer commands it. So we had the platform, we had the talent onboarded, and we had what we call the briefs.
How did you come up with the process to break down that huge project into those parts? Like, where did that methodology come from?
That came from Michael Jackson as well, because I learned how that works in visual effects, right? And in traditional motion graphics, we hand an artist the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. In visual effects, it's not like that. It's like one person does the plate, another person does all the little things that are on fire, another person creates the smoke that comes off that fire, another person comps it, right? And that's that kind of VFX methodology where everything is kind of parsed out to different specialists who are experts at doing these different things. So that's where that came from.
Got that. And so what was your mindset? You told the client, you're like, we're going to deliver on this. Like, how were you feeling when you started out? You built an MVP to start this process, pull in people from all over the world potentially. And it is a gamble, like you said. Like, how were you feeling? Were you positive mindset, or were you kind of worried about how this would turn out? What were you thinking?
I was scared. Yeah, I was scared. I had no idea what was going to happen. So, but in the back of my mind, I think I had a belief that it was going to work, but I didn't know. So, and part of the bigger part of this challenge too was, making the budget work. So we had to assign a budget to every one of those jobs and make it equitable, but make it work. And so finally the day came when we were going to go live and we were going to turn on the system, and dozens of artists and studios around the world were going to get access to our jobs, and they were going to be able to use the system to let us know if they're ready, willing, and able, which means, to us, that means we don't need to see a proposal. We don't need to see an RFP. We just need you to read all the information. It's all there. And we need you to tell us three things: capable, available, on board with the terms. That's all we need to know. Okay. So we turned on the system, and that was probably I've been through a lot, and that was one of the scariest moments of my career. Not knowing what was going to happen at that moment. We turned the system on and sat there and waited, and pretty soon we started getting notifications. Buenos Aires, New York, Los Angeles, London, not really Asia or India, some Eastern Europe. And we were like, holy shit, this talent wants to be part of this project. We're getting RWA, which is ready, willing, and able notifications from all over the world. And so I looked at my team and we said, well, so by design, how this works is we're supposed to look at the RWAs, and if we get 5 RWAs for a job, like to make this certain fire element. We look at the RWAs, we click through their links that they sent through, we see which one's the best fit, and we flip a switch that says, welcome to this job. Please e-sign a deal memo right inside the system. Feel free to start working and let us know if you have any questions. So
Now,
we did,
yeah. Yeah, so with that process, you got people like that are actually, I mean, they're getting started and they might be, halfway across the world from what I understand. Like what now it sounds great, right? You shifted from kind of being risky and like handcuffed somewhat, right, with local talent that you were trying to utilize in a way that was really against maybe their strengths. But now you're exposed to global talent. Like what challenges, it's not a perfect switch, right? There's probably challenges that you're facing now with the global movement. What were you faced there right away with?
um, well, I think the thing that we realized before we did this, before we implemented this process, we thought about trying this before we thought of stimulated works, and we quickly realized that there would be no way to schedule 40 phone calls to discuss a brief across time zones, cultural language barriers. It was hard enough to onboard the talent. And as we were going through the process of onboarding the talent, it kind of validated that there's no way to do this on the phone. You just couldn't do it. So, so we threw that out there. We never thought about entertaining the idea of just hiring 40 artists around the world the traditional way. So we threw that out. But what happened was that, the most interesting thing, and this is the biggest epiphany of the whole process, is that once we flipped 12 switches that first day and saw 12 people start working without asking us a single question, by about noon that day, on the first day that we turned the system on, I looked at my team and I said, now what? And we had nothing to do. The next day we came to work and we had work to look at and review and give feedback on. And we used the system in the way it was designed to give the feedback written. We gave the feedback written. We got the revisions, and it just started snowballing from there. And what I didn't realize, and what I this is the the biggest surprise of the whole process, was that like instantly I was home for dinner with my wife and family. I was at my kids' soccer matches and birthday parties on the weekends. We were getting the best work of our lives turned in. And that project actually went on to be our client's most successful project. It was a cruise line, highest customer ratings, won a live design award. And I just told myself, we're never going back.
Yeah. And so the one thing that's interesting, and I saw a lot of this resistance with my own like agency journey, so Rob, when I started with a video production company, very similar nature, we were in DC, did a lot of government projects, a lot of nonprofit stuff, light on the political work, but a lot of filming on site. We would bring it back, put it together, distribution on the web and also on TV as well. And the one thing, we were filming a lot, so we needed local talent, right? So we had to be on site and bring the footage back, put it on hard drives. We couldn't get it on the internet at that time. It wasn't even possible. And the one thing that's interesting is, when I did sell that agency and I started a new one, I purposefully I put some barriers around some of our workflow, and I said, look, we got to be able to work with people around the world, because the first thing that I saw was when I was able to take a Photoshop file, and back then it was called PSD to HTML, where you take like the Photoshop file and you convert it into front end code, right? CSS and style, and we were using people around the world to do that, where traditionally I had people. I was sitting over their shoulder and I was watching them move pixels, code things, and say, all right, yeah, that navigation bar does look exactly like the design, or, we need more padding or whatever. This was the first time where I said, hey, here's the Photoshop file, and then here's the output that I expect. And it was amazing to see that when I would come back in 2 days and look at the results that were delivered by someone across the world. And I just pulled it up and I'm like, this is exactly what I asked for. I didn't have to sit with that person in the office, and we didn't have to have a brainstorming meeting to talk about the approach. And it was a very clear spec, and it was a very clear output. And that was like my big light bulb moment. But I'll ask you, the one thing that was missing from that process was the brainstorming side, where so many creative folks feel like they need that to be a piece of it. Do you feel like something was missing from that process, or how did you wrestle with that component?
Yeah, so this is kind of the core of the stimulated method, and what you just said, what you just described, is the power of the brief. The stimulated method is predicated on an idea that I discovered through this process, which is separating creative from production and execution. The creative process obviously is very important, but when I used to do what you talked about, walk around my studio, look over the shoulder of the artist, oh, make that a little different, oh,
Mm-hmm.
make that a little more purple. Um, that's actually not a healthy creative process. Um, and it wasn't until I implemented the method and stimulated method and started using stimulated works that I understood that. And what stimulated works did for us was it forced us to be better creative directors and better directors. And what I mean by that is that we can't release a brief into the world that is going to cause an artist to have questions. Every brief we put out into the world has to answer every question an artist or a studio could have before they have to ask it. And if even today, if we get work back where we look at it and we're like, wow, that's actually not what we expected, probably 95 times out of 100, we can find the error in our brief. And so what we came up with is a 16-point bulletproofing process to make sure that the briefs are rock solid before they get to an artist, a talent, a studio. And so, our job as creatives is to come up with amazing creative ideas, be wildly creative at the beginning of the process, and then step back and let talent, do their best work. And that's not to say that, we're not going to be, a part of the iterative process, but it's a different approach. It's, it really is separating creative from production. And when, you'll find that, what I found was that when we gave the artists and talent everything they needed to do their best work, not only could they do their best work, most oftentimes they would exceed our expectations. Like, they have so much extra time, bandwidth, and energy. They can go the extra mile and give you something that you might not have asked for, but is a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny, because the agencies that I have now extend beyond um, creative studios. So, like, I started in that area, but now we're doing, full life cycle marketing engagements. And I found that the brief process, which I'm going to ask you about here in a second, is not only important for creative projects, but it's also, like, let's say we're doing an ABM campaign or a paid media strategy that we're putting together, and we need to spec out, like, what does that paid media campaign setup look like in LinkedIn and Google Ads, and you need a strong brief for that. And that gives someone on the paid media side to make those decisions based on that brief that you have. It's not prescriptive necessarily, but it's detailed to where they have those boundaries to work within. And that brings me to, like, what do you consider to be a good creative brief?
Um, Like I said a minute ago, it's a brief that answers every single question that the person executing on it could ever ask before they have to ask it.
And how do you build one of those? Do you like test it within your team? Say like, hey, here's a sample brief. Like, do you think this is good enough on the receiving end, or how do you iterate that on the front end before you do use it?
Yeah, we do. We pass it around between our team members and say, "Fight, what holes do you see in this?" And so if we pass it around between three people twice, it goes around the circle three times, and by the time that we've gone around those circles, it's bulletproof.
Got it. And like so with the brief is crucial to the process. We've talked about, the importance of structure and file naming, but like with those two components, like tell me like in the grand scheme of things, what is the stimulated method within like your stimulated works? Like how would you describe that process that you have really assembled from some of these early lessons that you learned?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, everything I do is transformative. I'm in the kind of in the transformation business. I would say it's a radical transformation of the creative process. Um, you know, a lot of people think that, putting their stamp on the work all the way, from the beginning to the end is that's what it means to be a creative director. In my view, what it means to be a creative director is to come up with an amazing idea and articulate your vision as a director. I mean, every all of the best directors that I've ever worked with, from Michael Jackson to Kenny Ortega with Disney to Spike Jones, unexpected names like Paula Abdul, all of those people have the ability to have a creative vision and articulate it in a way where all the people doing the work know exactly what they have to do. I mean, the first time I met Michael Jackson, my meeting was 12 hours long, and he described, a 3-hour concert. And when I walked out of that meeting, I had a notebook with all my notes in it, but it was here. And the way that he articulated his vision and what he expected from me, I was able to go turn that around to a team of 200 people who were going to execute on his vision. And that was, that's the stimulated method. It's it's what's the vision, articulate it to the people that are going to do the work in a way where they don't have any questions, and that's the stimulated method.
Yeah, love it. And you one of your arguments was like traditionally agencies, in order to scale, it was through headcount, through finding talented people, and that was really the only way you could scale. But like one of the arguments that you have with your method is that systems is actually the true bottleneck. If you don't have the system in place, that you're not going to be able to scale. Like why do you think that is, or maybe explain that thing that's really misunderstood with agencies right now?
Yeah, so let's just say, what happens when a project starts up? Um, you've got to go out and source the talent, which means searching on Behance and all these other, what other sites. It means making phone calls to check on availability, capability, rates. Um, once you identify the talent, you've got to onboard them. It means getting deal memos out, getting the deal memos back. It means setting up calls to articulate the brief, to tell them about the project. Now, all of that work that I just described is before any of the actual creative work even begins. Now, think about the investment of time, think about the investment of money, think about the investment of energy, think about the head count that goes into just that process before you've even broken ground on the project. With the stimulated method and stimulated works, if you were to tell me, Rob, I want to start a campaign today, and we're going to need probably 40 artists on it, I would say, okay, it can start today. And the work would start today, and you would see actual work tomorrow. And no money spent. It's nothing. and that's the opposite of bloat, right? I
Yeah.
didn't have, I didn't, I, my projects were so demanding that I didn't have the not only the bandwidth and the capacity, but the will to deal with onboarding talent, to deal with the back and forth, the paperwork, the invoicing, like everything about our work that we do. It doesn't matter if we have 10 artists, 40 artists, 100 artists. Um, our team focuses on the task at hand, which is the project, and all the other stuff is automated.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell me, like, with in the age of AI is pretty much touching every piece of marketing. Obviously on the creative side as well. Like, how do you feel like agencies that focus on a system like this are better prepared to take advantage of AI within their workflows? Like, tell me about like the state of things there that you're seeing.
Yeah, so I drilled down hard into AI for the last couple of years, and what I've concluded is that this approach actually plays into AI perfectly because um, you know the people that are really using AI in not interesting ways, but in actual valuable ways are the same people that are already experts in traditional workflows. They're experts in traditional pipelines. They're expert, uh, you know, creative technologists. They're expert artists, and they're finding ways to use AI to integrate and come alongside those existing workflows. And so, let's just say, for example, you have a brief that says we want to do something interesting, and we're interested in using AI. Instead of going out and saying who's doing what with AI, you're going to get flooded with information. Like everyone's doing everything with AI. I mean, the world is just full of so much noise. Well, the way I would approach it is I would say, let's make a brief that says, "Hey, we have a campaign that looks like this, and we're interested in using just we're interested in finding out how AI can solve problems. Can solve some of these problems." It goes out on stimulated works. We get RWAs from a lot of very talented and skilled artists that say, "Here's what I can do, and here's how I'm using AI in my world." And you can actually kind of create these little bespoke teams, with different talents. Say like, okay, going back to the Michael Jackson, how the VFX breaks down into granular parts and pieces, and we can say, okay, this team's going to work traditionally, but we're going to integrate these guys to take those assets and do something with AI that they can't do. And so it works really well with AI. And a lot of the talent that I work with and talk to, uh, on a daily basis are using AI in different ways. But it's just so wide open right now that this is a great way to this is a great way to figure out how AI and if AI can help your project.
Yeah. And with the different size projects you've worked on, like in your broadcasting days and then shifting to like experiential and interactive, massive projects. Now you have like this hybrid system that you've created using global talent. Um, when you think about maybe the next 3 to 5 years, I know you're not you can't read the future, but like if you had to make bets, like what do you think studios now need to do to be prepared for what's in front of them in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think they need to um, become agile. I mean, it's that's what I did. I mean, that's how I future proofed myself. I mean, if I had stuck with my brick and mortar, um, you know, local talent, traditional walk around the studio, looking over people's shoulders, definitely be out of business by now. You have to decentralize. You have to be able to harness global talent. You have to be able to move quickly. And I think, you have to you have to have some kind of a system that lets you do that. I mean, if you are going to be if it takes you 3 weeks to start a project, I don't think that bodes well for the future. I think you have to have some kind of a system, whether you build it or whether you onboard it. You have to have a system that lets you harness global talent in a simple way and cost effective without bloat.
Yeah. And let me ask you the final question for you. Like what with a lot of the movement to global talent, um, is it was you were able to find specialists, um, and also take advantage of, labor prices across the world, which is an obvious arbitrage there. But then on the flip side, we have AI entering the equation. Like, what do you think is the right mix moving forward? Is it all global talent? Is it finding some local talent that is able to work with clients directly, or like what is your take on that?
So in the stimulated method, we talk about that, um, and there's some simple rules. If it makes sense, if you have to work shoulder to shoulder with somebody, that's in-house talent, and we still have in-house talent, and we still work shoulder to shoulder with people, and that's an important part of our process. So, the way we approach it is that anything, if it makes sense that an artist in another part of the world should do the work, then they do the work. If it makes sense that our in-house team of 6 people comes together to do a project, then we do it like that. So it's just a mix and a balance, and working together shoulder to shoulder with people, being in the same room with people can be important and is important, but you have to identify those situations and make the decision as to when do you keep it in house, and when do you I don't like to use the word outsource, because what we do really is not outsourcing. It's really orchestration. It's orchestrating global talent. And so our approach is that when I decentralized my business, we kept a core team. We kept the core team that's like the finishing team, like, and in the end of the day, and I talk about this in the book too, if somebody on the outside fails, we know that we can always punt and throw the work over to our in-house team, and it's going to get done. And so I think it's just finding the right balance of making sure that you have enough in-house resources so that your project is protected, but also having enough outsourced resources to get the work done at any scale that you need.
Yeah. And I love that take on outsourced work because, sometimes clients will ask us within some of our agencies, like, oh, do you outsource that? And it's like, well, that person that does that work, like, for example, sometimes, like, for many years, we had like sonic branding, like sound mixing for podcast intros and outros. We had someone that we would go to for that specific need. They weren't full time in how they're not, that's not what they're doing 40 hours a week. And it's silly if we have that person in house doing that, because that work can be done remotely. And it's like, I don't know, it's a weird stigma that's attached to that. It's like, well, outsource is a weird word. That means we don't know this person. They're not familiar with our process. They don't understand how it fits into the grand scheme of the project. But the truth of the matter is they do. We work with them all the time. It's just they are then free to work on other projects for other agencies that, rely upon their strengths. And I think that is just something that's misunderstood in a lot of ways. At least with some of the marketers that we work with, they don't understand how all these pieces come together. And so I like that take for sure. And Rob, like where should people go to find out more about what you're doing, your agency, like maybe how to learn from your system? I mean, I mentioned the book a little bit throughout, but what's the best place for them to go right now?
Stimulated-inc.com.
All right. What can they expect to see there? Is it should they go to the book, or does that have like everything that you need from right there?
Yeah, the front page has links to stimulated works, and you'll get links to the stimulated method, and I'm more than happy to walk people through demos and and schedule one-on-ones, because I know that, what we do is a little scary to a lot of people, and I found that out over the years. And I think that what I would like to see is you know I would like to get to a place where you know we can be your creative operations, right? Um, we can relieve a lot of pressure. We have the systems in place, and you don't have to build the systems. And so, there's been a lot of resistance, to be honest, and I understand it because people are resistant to change. But I feel like what I'm hearing these days is that change is not going to be a choice in the future. It's going to be required. So people are going to have to do something, and I'd love to get in front of people and just let them, see what it is that we have to offer.
All right. Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks for joining me. I'm glad we were able to reschedule this and get it on the board and made it happen. Thanks for joining me on Agency in Motion.
Thank you, Tristan.
Thanks for listening to Agency in Motion. For more episodes, insights, and our latest thinking on agency growth and acquisitions, visit aragon-holdings.com and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll see you next time.